This panel is very special. This is about the African fintechs expanding globally. The trend of African fintechs moving to locations like Brazil, India, the United States, and more interestingly for us today as an audience, to North Africa. We're seeing a lot of sub-Saharan African fintechs now looking to deploy and come with boots on the ground here in Egypt, for example. And to get a better understanding of this, we have invited the very companies themselves to speak about their strategies on their expansion strategy, and how are they going to do it? Will it be partnership-led? Will it be with a direct investment in this company, in this country? So we were here to welcome 4 distinguished speakers. I'm here to welcome Dina Shenoufy, our moderator. She's the Chief Investment Officer at Flat6 Labs and a friend. Hi, Dina. Good morning. We have Adeyemi, Head of Partnerships and Expansions in Flutterwave. Good morning, Hello. Hossam Abou Moussa, Partner at Apis Partners. Welcome to the stage, Hossam. And Falgu Shah, Head of BizOps and Expansion from Paystack. Hi, Falgu. We were supposed to meet, actually, a few days ago. Good morning. Friend of friends. All right, everyone has their mics and we're good to go. Yeah. Have a nice panel, guys.
Yeah, it is now. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see a full room. It's been a while since we've all gathered, so this is a lovely opportunity. Good morning to my panelists. Pleasure having you here. I really am blessed with people that are the movers and the shakers of the fintech industry at all different aspects and levels in the African continent. I think it comes as no surprise. Everyone has mentioned it earlier, and so I would hate to reiterate, but the fintech opportunity in in Africa is huge. It's an opportunity that stems from a need, which in my opinion is often the biggest form of an opportunity. We probably fare as a continent far below average, world average in terms of bankable populations, payment solutions, credit card penetration, and financial literacy at large. And so it's no surprise that this room today is filled with individuals and institutions across all the continent very keen to support that role. And so, again, I have a fantastic panel. Unfortunately, we had a few that couldn't make it, but nonetheless, we have the investors, we have the unicorns, and we have the companies that have made a mark and created a unique technology out of Africa that was sexy enough for the West companies to come and say, we can acquire that technology, it's unique. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Head of Partnerships and Expansions at Flutterwave, Falgu, Head of Business, Ops and Expansion at Paystack, and Hossam Abou Moussa, Partner at Apis. And so I'd like to hand over for each of you to just very quickly introduce yourself and the company to our audience.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Omosalewa Adeyemi, but I go by O. I head the Global Partnerships and Expansion team at Flutterwave. Flutterwave is a payment technology company. Our goal really is to simplify payments on the African continent for both businesses and individuals. My main responsibility is to build the infrastructure, the payment infrastructure that Flutterwave is leveraging across countries. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry. Hi, my name is Falgu Shah. I'm leading business operations and expansion at Paystack. Similar to Flutterwave, we're also a payments infrastructure company. We're currently live in 3 markets in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa with Pan-African and global ambitions. Earlier this year, we were acquired by Stripe, which is a large payments infrastructure company based out of the US. And together with them, we hope to digitize more of the African continent and bring more merchants into the global digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with the whole Falgu on this panel. So my name is Hossam Abou Moussa. I'm a partner at Apis. We are an ESGI native investor. We basically invest. We're a PE and venture growth investor. We provide growth capital for companies going through growth stage, mainly focusing on financial services and financial services infrastructure. We advise and manage on commitments of about a little bit more than $1.2 billion. And to date, we've been investing in Africa, South and Southeast Asia.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So, and Falgu, I'll start with you. You daring enough company starting out of Africa, addressing solutions that are genuinely needed. How was the expansion route? I mean, a big part of today is how do you expand? The title of this panel is Expanding Globally, Fintechs Expanding. Now, Fintechs is a very interesting sector because it tends to face regulation that is very strict, particularly still in Africa, across different countries. So how do you take that route to expansion? I mean, I know Flutterwave is in now 20 companies and soon to be in Egypt as well. How do you go about being able to expand a fintech company with the regulations, variances in literacies, variances in adoption, variances in population dynamics across the region?
Yes, absolutely. I think the first thing that's not a question in any of our minds is the fact that payment systems and interconnected payment systems are needed across the continent. And so from Flutterwave perspective, when we look to expand our footprint across not only Africa, but also outside Africa, there are a few questions that we really want to answer before we begin that journey, before we begin that exercise. One is to get a sense of what the digital payments landscape looks like in that country. So first things first, how many people do we have in this country? How many people have access to digital financial services? How many people have access to the internet? What are the habits of people when they transact online? What are the most subscribed payment types in each of these countries? And perhaps most important, what are the regulations in this country that would allow Flutterwave to bring our products and services to that country? You've rightfully said regulations can be complicated. For us, the challenge is working closely with regulators even before we launch, right? Day one on the country, I want to meet with the Ministry of Finance, I want to meet with the central bank, I want to meet with other financial institutions, whether they're banks, whether they're mobile network operators, or even other fintechs, to really get a sense of what is the impact of Flutterwave launching in these countries, what are the regulations that we need to pay attention to, what can we do to help regulators better understand our goal as a company, better understand the products that we're trying to launch, then finding the middle ground, the common ground between all of those factors, and really deciding on the best strategy to push forward.
Thank you so much. Falgu.
Yeah, I mean, similar in terms of thinking about the macro environments that exist in our markets. Unlike Flutterwave, I think Paystack's expansion strategy, we're not live in 20 markets, we're live in 3. But we still have similar goals in terms of being Pan-African. And I think our tempered expansion when it comes to the countries we've launched in has been quite intentional from that respect. But again, we're doing the groundwork to understand every market we go into, we're working with different banks, we're working with a different regulator, we're working with a different currency, we're working with a different tax regime. And so doing the due diligence to understand what that means and build an ecosystem around us that incentivizes banks that incentivizes regulators to actually commonly together build the products of the future, and allow merchants to build on top of our infrastructure to offer those products has been quite critical. And so, yes, today we're live in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, but together with Stripe, our ambition is to connect our merchants into a global payments and treasury network with access to Chinese markets, US markets, European markets, and enable those merchants to accept the local payment methods that O was talking about in each of those places. Every country is so nuanced from that perspective. We have Fowry here in Egypt, we have M-Pesa in Kenya, and understanding how people consume is critical to our success in developing and scaling e-commerce markets in the countries we're in. And together with Flutterwave, I'll give you the example in Nigeria. Paystack launched 5 years ago, and the amount of volume that is flowing through our platform today is almost 10 times what the entire country of Nigeria had processed online 5 years ago when we started. So, when we talk about ecosystem building, that's what we're trying to do within our expansion strategy. It's really bring our partners in to build commerce, build that industry from the ground up, and deliver on those products for the future.
Super. Hossam, as someone who has a bird's eye view, you've invested in India. You guys have a portfolio that spans India, China, and certainly the African continent. Where do you see the growth coming? What is your view on fintech in Africa?
Sure, thank you, Dina. So look, when I started investing in financial services like 10, 15 years ago, and payments exactly about 10 years ago, I think there were a set of growth drivers that were present then that continue to be present now and probably magnified. Number one, of course, is the penetration and coverage. And it was demonstrated over the last decade. So for example, here in Egypt, I think the digital spend or consumer spend on a digital channel was probably 2 or 3% of consumer spend. Today, at best, this might be 10%. So yes, it increased 3-4 folds, but we're still 90% plus cash. So the kind of coverage and penetration point, it's still massive, and it will continue to be big for the foreseeable future. I think the second is the reach and the ability to reach physically and not physically. So for example, for most lending businesses, you need to know your customer, you need to have data, you need to know if they're credit worthy. And at best, probably a third of most of African population is covered by credit bureaus. And this is the size of the pie for banking institutions trying to kind of like lend consumers or small businesses. What was going on kind of like the digital front and the revolution happening where each consumer or a business is carrying a smartphone, and we heard from His Excellency Mr. Joseph on kind of how this digital infrastructure and telecom infrastructure growing is enabling businesses to reach consumers that were expensive to serve for financial institutions, and to collect data to be able to make decisions on their creditworthiness. This is continuing, and that's another driver that we will see happening in Africa and beyond. I think regulatory environment, we've always had kind of like supportive regulatory environment in Egypt and in North Africa and broader Africa. But again, you kind of heard from Dr. Rasha was kind of how this is kind of on the top of the agenda of most of the African governments, is digitalization of the economy and financial inclusion. So if you combine kind of like this access to data, technology, all of that, of course, you end up with a massive opportunity that existed 10 years ago, continue to exist. I think the only thing changed is valuation multiples, but it's a different subject.
We'll get to that. So Hossam, I have a question. To follow through on the opportunity. So the opportunity is fantastic because there's a need and there's a willingness to support from governments across. But nonetheless, as an investor that is trying to pick the winning fintech startup, the challenge that faces a fintech startup is often larger. The barriers to entry are not as easy, and the growth means a lot of groundwork, such as what Owen and Falgu were mentioning. You have to build partnership, create different ecosystems every time you move. How, as an investor, do you assess a fintech company's ability and what are the key components that you see a fintech startup needs to have to actually manage that growth successfully?
Sure. So we are a growth capital provider. So of course we end up looking at the whole ecosystem because that's the only thing we do. We invest in financial services and fintech, and we regularly invest in earlier stage businesses to back them through a growth stage, or as M&A activities if we're doing a buy and build platform, like what we did in kind of the online acceptance in Africa, or for just normal M&A activity through our businesses. And I think what we benefit from is the focus and the industry expertise. So we're 30 investment professionals. All of us only do financial services. So we kind of like see the trends across markets. We see market structure, the point that O was talking about, and I think it's a requirement.
But would you say that the trends are uniform across global markets, or is it uniform across emerging markets?
So market structures differ. I think that's the point that O was referring to. If it's a different market structure, it will be very difficult for a business to expand into this market structure. But they rhyme. So there is a bit of kind of rhythm happening across these market structures. And I think I wouldn't call it the hot areas. I think the kind of the subsectors evolve. So obviously acceptance, which has been a big theme, will continue to be a big theme. But for example, the kind of like we see the more exciting growth areas are coming, or the changes happening are, for example, in capturing the tail. So most of our markets already kind of the underbanked are being served. Now the bigger opportunity is the unbanked. So many businesses are moving from underbanked into kind of like trying to mine the kind of the completely unbanked. We see businesses focusing on ecosystem evolution. So lots of companies are doing M&A activity or extending their line of business to have full control of an ecosystem around their customer, maybe a consumer or a business. So I think a second trend is definitely the ecosystem evolution across around the customer, which is resulting into many businesses operating at multiple verticals. So for example, payment companies are extending loans, and lending businesses are accepting payments, and it's all around creating an ecosystem around a customer. And I think like probably another trend that we're seeing growing is embedded finance, where basically you see across business to business service providers, health tech, insurance tech, many of these businesses are offering financial services products and services through an embedded finance proposition.
So actually, I'll move on to you. Speaking of Hossam mentioning how you end up diversifying your portfolio as a fintech, and that's the trend. How has that been for Flutterwave? I mean, I know that you guys have actually recently been very keen on expanding your portfolio of products. So you've decided to provide Flutterwave Store. You've done the partnerships with Visa in terms of launching barter and really just trying to have a vertical expansion in addition to the geographic expansion. Is that key, you believe, to the growth of Flutterwave, not just the geographic? And is that part of a consolidation strategy that you feel is key for fintech growth?
Absolutely. So at the core of it, what we really are an infrastructure company, right? The first manifestation of that, and the primary manifestation of that, will continue to be in building payment infrastructure. That involves the geographical expansion piece. However, in order to truly scale on the continent, it's important that we as a company think about ways in which we can innovate and make it easy for businesses and individuals to get online and begin transacting in the first place. So from where we sit, it's not enough for us to say we've connected the 90 payment types across 20 countries in Africa onto one platform, we're done. No, because there are still small and medium enterprises out there who are having the most difficult time bringing their businesses online. So then the next challenge that we want to solve as a company is, well, how do we simplify that process? By creating a product like Flutterwave stores where you as an SME, you can go online and in 5 minutes you go from running your business in your living room or via some messaging platform to having your own website that you can publish on your same social media platforms, except now it's easy for your customer to go on, add items to their cart, check out because the payment is already built in. If it's a physical good, have it delivered to your customer. So really extending the value chain of what we bring to businesses beyond the payments. That's the thought process behind Flutterwave stores. It's the similar thought process behind Flutterwave events, which you can kind of liken to an Eventbrite for Africa, really. Also has payments built in. If you're an event organizer, you go on, you create your event, ticketing, ticket redemption, tracking your sales, everything is all built in to really make it easy for you as a business to get online and do what you need to do. It's not just us providing you with the ability to accept payments, because that is one of the challenges that you face as an SME. Now, taking that one step further, we also recently announced our launch of Flutterwave Grow, which is really a full business solution that allows the informal business to become formal and have access to the financial tools that they need to run their businesses. So now we've gone beyond, okay, you need to accept payments, to, okay, you operate in a certain vertical, we need to make it easy for you to come online, to how do you actually become a registered entity, a recognized entity, so that you are in a better position to grow and scale your business? And those are the types of strategic moves that we want to continue to make as we think about scaling, not just in Africa, but in the rest of the regions across the world.
That's amazing. How does that factor in the structure of the company, right? Because you go from just being a payment gateway and an infrastructure into also trying to be an e-commerce supporter, into you actually look at one entity, which is SMEs, and say, how can I service you all across the value chain? But then it also, at some level, means that you are putting yourself in a situation where you're competing at multiple verticals as an institution. So do you feel this is a strength or a weakness?
I absolutely think it's a strength. So for us from day one, and I think it really comes out not only in our company DNA, but in the DNA of most people that you see who work with us, we do not limit ourselves to thinking, I do payments and that's it. And that's a very important component of actually doing this strategic expansion and doing it successfully. So when our CEO came up with the idea of launching Flutterwave Grow, which is, let me help a business incorporate, because helping that business incorporate means that I have an easier time onboarding them, means that I can increase my TPV, right? It wasn't an idea that needed to be sold to everybody, because we saw the potential in that. We saw the vision in that. We saw how it connected to our overall mission as a company to really simplifying payments for people across the continent. I am a true believer in, if you set your mind to it, it's doable. And yes, challenges will arise when you start to stretch yourself and have to build expertise in things that, quote unquote, could be considered outside of your core. It's difficult, but it's absolutely doable.
Sounds fantastic. I think our Egyptian fintechs would have to watch out with you guys coming in. Falgu, another very key element that I think has been brought up repeatedly, both O and Hossam mentioned it, is the rise of e-commerce. Now, I know Stripe started out as an institution that wanted to simplify opening bank accounts and actually registration for SMEs, and now it's all about, very similarly, how do we expand our product offering targeting the same clients. And I know that their acquisition of Paystack can only be a testament to how much they see value and potential in the fintech and financial inclusion efforts within Africa. But it's also, as their CEO mentioned, a very, very clear double down on the potential of e-commerce. How do you see e-commerce and digital consumption go hand in hand with fintech growth?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And if you look at the numbers, while 17% of the world's population lives in Africa, only 2% of the world's digital commerce is happening on the continent. So we know that there's a huge opportunity to grow. Like, that gap will be filled. And it's up to the infrastructure builders to lay down that opportunity for them. And to O's point, I think it's important to now think about fintech in a multi-dimensional aspect. Our world is evolving. When you talk to fintechs now, yes, there's some that come into a new market and say, hey, I'm here to do everything across like online to offline, fiat to crypto. There's so many different dimensions, local to global. And I think everyone is ambitious, and it's a good thing. But when we talk about true value-added services for merchants and those growing e-commerce businesses, I think in our minds, we're thinking about reliability for payment acceptance. Payment acceptance, you can say, is a commoditized business, but to do it reliably is very difficult, actually. The second part to it is enabling or powering businesses that have unique business models, SaaS businesses or three-way marketplaces. How do you enable recurring billing? How do you pay out when your vendors are based in 30 different countries? How do you provide data insights to your customers based on what transactions are flowing through your platform? Identity verification, fraud prevention. So this entire suite of products that enable e-commerce to actually scale in a way that's sustainable, I think is super interesting. And I have a question for the investors in the room too, is that we see a lot of VC activity flowing into the enablement of e-commerce, whether it's payments or logistics or identity or regtech. And it's incredible because now more than ever, engineering talent is being dedicated directly to this particular problem set. And it's amazing because, quite frankly, as I said, the gap is there, the opportunity exists. We see it, Stripe sees it, the rest of the world see it, SoftBank certainly apparently sees it. So I think that it's a great time for innovators to actually take that money, no matter where it's coming from, and try and push the envelope when it comes to innovation. Because what I mentioned before about ecosystem building, I really think that's the only way to actually, and I can tell you stories about conversations that we have with the Central Bank of Nigeria. It's not easy conversations to have, but once you have alignment and incentives around what you're trying to deliver 10 years down the road, it becomes a much easier conversation, and incentives are aligned.
So I'll take you up on that and ask, from both of your perspectives, what did you find was a very successful expansion that Flutterwave or Paystack recently had? And what do you attribute that success to? Like, what if you share with the audience your key to success in a growth market, a very particular one, which would you say is a recent growth market that you've ventured into and very happy about?
I would actually say Egypt, not just because we're sitting here, but because I think from an expansion perspective, we've had one of the most straightforward processes that we've had across the continent. Few reasons for that. One, from the moment we set our eyes on Egypt, it was not very difficult for us to get access to the data that we needed to evaluate if and how we were going to expand here.
So you say data is very important for your successful expansions.
Extremely important. And unfortunately, it's one of the challenges that we face as Flutterwave in the course of expansion, because there's just a few metrics that we want to make sure we understand in order to guide us in how best to launch. And sadly, that information is not always readily available. I've launched many a market where you just have to take a leap of faith and hope that what you think is what the reality actually is, or that the subset of people that you've interfaced with.
How often are your gut feelings right?
I say about 80% of the time. But yes, gut feeling, I've done a lot of gut judgments in expanding across the continent. And thankfully to date, there haven't been any major mishaps. But it sure is nice to come in and be able to definitively say, oh, these are how many digital transactions there are in this country. These are how many people are subscribed to these different payment types. This is what I need to prioritize. And that's been a very smooth and straightforward process here in Egypt. The other thing is also having just very clear regulations on what I need to do to launch here. We've had very engaging discussions with the regulators in the financial sector. They've been very welcoming to us. So really looking forward to our officially launch. We're live, but we haven't officially launched. So I'm here for the next 2 weeks to work on that, and really excited to add Egypt to our portfolio.
Like, do you feel like cultures is a barrier in terms of your expansions?
Not so much a barrier if you take the time and effort to understand it. Very good example. I don't mean to keep using Egypt as an example, but very recently I hosted my team retreat in Dakar because I grew my team, added about 20 people over COVID, and I'd never met any of them. And while we were in Dakar, we actually had a meeting with the central bank. We had a virtual meeting. We were trying to clarify something, and we had asked that question a few times, and it seemed as though what myself and my other Nigerian colleague were hearing was one thing. And so for us, in our experience, it's not okay most times to directly repeat a question that has somewhat been answered. And then my colleague Allah, who's in the audience here, she runs our operations in Egypt, just went in and was like, this is what I'm asking you, yes or no? And they did respond to her. That's not a move I would have taken if I was by myself. But I think definitely leveraging on local expertise, finding the right people in country to guide you and help you scale. I think differences in culture can be used to your advantage, absolutely. Because now I know definitively, yes, I can do this, as opposed to, reading between the lines.
Falgu?
Yes, I'd say probably the biggest success for us, and we're seeing this play out today, is our launch in South Africa, which happened in May this year. And this really ties to the strategic relationship we now have with Stripe. So we're a fully owned Stripe company, and a lot of global merchants are looking for ways to enter the African markets. And a lot of them do not want to incorporate 54 entities, even if there's an incorporation product for that across the continent. And they really see South Africa as like a key entry market for them to access the rest of the continent. And so a lot of these Silicon Valley or Australia or New Zealand-based merchants are now coming to Paystack through Stripe to enable that entry into the African market through South Africa. So that's where we see this like two-way opening African merchants up to the global economy, and equally allowing them access to the African continent, playing out very nicely.
Super. Hossam, what is an investor's role in supporting a fintech startup grow?
So, look, the investor role should cover a number of areas. I think investors should not manage businesses. We're investor managers, and we should support businesses, back managers to manage the business. But investors should offer the strategic compass, should offer support on guiding the kind of the strategic objective, should offer the governance, because obviously businesses, as they grow, they need to invest. So having a governance body is always helpful. And depending on the stage, most of the investors would come with some corporate finance background. So of course, we help a lot on M&A, on capital raising, and kind of like this side of the business. We're a specialized financial services investor, so of course we have sector expertise, so we can actually engage with management teams in better defining uncertainties, better defining risks, and better defining opportunities, and also in kind of like information and trends sharing from what we see in other markets. So these are some of the areas that we help our portfolio companies with.
So the dicey question, I think we've established that fintech is huge, the opportunity is there, the market is there. the valuations. Hossam, do you want to take a first stab at whether you feel
Sure.
valuations are justified lately?
Well, look, depends on the business and depends on the market. So obviously, lots of colleagues invested in businesses 10, 15 years ago at a lot lower multiples, and they still lost their capital. And many of us have been investing in the last 2 years at very interesting multiples, and we still made a lot of successful investments. So I think this has to be micro on, like, basically if you invest in a good business, back the right team, if a business has a strategic reason to win, so the depth and the width of the strategic moat, all these criteria are kind of like the size of the market. All these criteria will kind of lead into a conclusion of where this business can go, how far you can help it grow, and these are direct drivers into where the valuation is. What I'm not saying is we should value businesses at 2026 revenue, but definitely it's a guidance point that you should look at and appreciate where this business can be and how big it can be while you're looking at valuation. So yes, there's a lot of capital, multiples are high, but I think this question has to be addressed on specific opportunities. Is this business going to make it? Is it worth it? Is this the right investment? And that's how we look at it.
Absolutely.
But I would like to ask you this question. You are an investor, and I think the question is twofold. First is your view on that. But the second thing is, as this pressure of valuation increase come from the kind of Series A, Series B, how do you find this at the earlier stage businesses as kind of like entrepreneurs and founders start inviting investors to come in and back them? Is this changing? Are they asking for too much now? Are they holding their equity that is still not proven dearly?
You turned the question on me. The moderators only ask, but I'll tell you. I'll tell you what we've seen. So I think as Fintech subs we're quite lucky that we come a lot earlier. So we don't have to worry about valuations. But I think definitely. I think the success of many fintech plays in the African continent has raised expectations in terms of what founders from get-go can raise and should be raising at in terms of evaluation. But you're right. I think we have seen situations whereby we've invested in an entrepreneur that didn't even have a product yet and was massively valued because we believed in that opportunity, in that expertise. And there will be other times when we say we cannot, to ourselves as investors, justify the valuation. It tends to be on a case-by-case basis, but I think there's no debate in that, even at the very grassroots level, which is where Fintech Labs is, we are seeing bubbling within the fintech in terms of expectations, sometimes premature ambitions, but I think sometimes as investors, it's our role to sort of manage that and give the perspective like you across a region as to what makes it work. So I know that things have been running, and so we're tight on time. I just want to make sure that there aren't any questions in the audience before. Oh, there is, right. Is there a way we can get a mic? No?
Should I shout?
It seems to be working.
I'm good at it. Hey everybody, so glad that you're all here. My name is Adeyemi, and I'm the co-founder of Abou. And if you're esteemed, slightly lowly terrorist, I had a question regarding culture when it came up. At the risk of offending anybody here, it's not just culture that you referenced. That was very interesting to me. I was wondering if any of you.
Thank you. Would maybe just comment on, we're in a part of the world where many people do not understand the rich beauty of Islamic business and cultures. And I learned something very interesting yesterday about the protection of women's names and the respect that is afforded to women within the family setting. Have you had any reason to revise your cultural approach when dealing as a woman or with women within the aspects of financial services, and how you get through those negotiations and discussions as women? That was my question.
It's a very.
I think that's not a question for me, I guess.
We'll save you for the next one, Hossam.
I think, so first things first, people never know that I'm a woman, because these days, before you meet people, you've probably had some sort of email correspondence before you have an in-person meeting or before you get on the phone. 95% of the time, people respond to my emails with Mr. O, Mr. Adeyemi. I do not bother to correct them. When I show up to meetings, they ask me, okay, glad you're here. When is Mr. O coming? Mr. O is here. Honestly, I think being a woman in this game is really just, and I use it to my advantage, because a lot of times, especially when it comes time to negotiate, I feel like my counterparties don't see me coming. And so when we put our
mode.
Yeah, when we put our terms on the table, it can kind of be like a wham, and there's nothing you want more than to disorient your opponent, even if it's just for 2 seconds during a negotiation. So I welcome it.
Thank you. Falgu, anything to add?
Yeah, I have to say, I get dis all the time in my emails. Shah, I'm like, yeah, that. And I also don't correct, because I feel like that truly is an advantage. You build a relationship, especially in times of COVID. I built relationships over Zoom or anonymously, where no one turns their video on, you're just email corresponding. And then the minute they actually see your face, it's like, oh, wow. And I'm also 5 foot, so they're like, oh, how old are you also? But I think it actually, to O's point, it plays to our advantage, and it gives others a chance to like take you seriously when they may not have at initial glance. I think doing business across multiple countries, I've been also a VC investor, actually with Hossam at his previous fund, and a private equity investor, and seen the stakes from both sides. Been on all sides of the table, and I just hope that more women entrepreneurs are like encouraged to step up and have those conversations, because they're hard, and like having people like Dina who are actually investing in those entrepreneurs is so helpful. And so the more representation we can get across the board, no matter what the country or the culture is so valuable. You know, in our business, we're primarily a Nigerian business today, we send our sales reps sometimes to the north of the country, and they are just not taken seriously if they're females. And we have to play to that reality sometimes. We have to say, oh, we have to send a male colleague with you on this trip for your own safety. But like to understand the realities, but as a company, advocate for more women at the table to change perceptions and minds, I think is absolutely important.
Yeah, and to share a perspective, I think if you think as I think of success factors for businesses growing or businesses expanding across border, because that's the topic here, definitely neither gender, age, or any of these of the team or of the person demonstrate in top of 10 issues of my mind. I think the world has moved on massively, especially in this sector where it's all about kind of like innovation and proof of execution capability. So I think the success factors that we observed across markets are all about market structure, execution capability, and just having a superior product or a technologically advanced proposition. These are kind of like some examples of how you can succeed in a cross-border expansion.
So we only have, I think, a few seconds left, but just before we wrap up, I would love for each of you to tell the audience what's next for your respective companies, or for you as a strategy, Hossam, in terms of fintech exposure.
We're expanding outside of Africa, looking to launch Europe and US in January. We're primarily focusing on our Flutterwave for Business product. And we're also launching a new remittance product called Flutterwave Send. We're partnering with financial institutions in both the US and in Europe to push remittances into the African continent. We've built a payout funnel across the continent, and we want to be able to tap into the send side.
It's fantastic. I'm glad Chipper Cash aren't here today. They would have felt the competition. Falgu?
Yeah, I'll maybe speak to my 5 to 10 year view of Africa. I think there's 3 things that are really front of mind for me. One is how do we enable the African diaspora to build for Africa. I think that you're increasingly seeing Egyptians or Nigerians or Kenyans go to other places in the world or other places in Africa. And, you know, I like to think of it in the same way as how like music and Afrobeats have proliferated. The same thing will happen with technology. So the question becomes, how do we enable those builders, no matter where they are, to build for Nigerians as a concept or Egyptians as a concept? And that involves a lot of kind of complexity when it comes to regulation, when it comes to effects, things like this. But in my mind, I'm like, how do we build for those? The second is open banking. I think we've seen the power of that in Europe and the US and what it can enable when we think about new business models that are emerging. And the third thing is crypto. I don't think that any of us can probably get away from it. If you think about Africans today as the biggest buyers and remitters of crypto, the conversation, you know, to the minister, we say, like, what conversations can we have so that in 10 years' time, we're advocating for the safe use cases of crypto and digital movement of funds across the continent.
Thank you, Falgu. Hossam?
I think for us it's a bit easier. We just continue to our high impact growth capital provision to high growth businesses or businesses going through the growth journey in financial services and financial services infrastructure space. We continue to be excited on kind of like the biggest revenue pools of payments and lending, but I think the kind of some of the themes I mentioned, such as the integrated ecosystem or ecosystems around the businesses, embedded finance, some of these themes we're very excited about, and I think we'll be doing more around these themes and verticals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely and a pleasure. Fun conversation. Hope our audience enjoyed it, and we'll let the rest of the program resume.
Thank you,
Dina. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for being extremely open and very insightful. Thank you, Dina, for this excellent moderation. And I might borrow a few things from you for my next panels.